Continuing a landmark visit to Iraq, Pope Francis holds the first public mass of his trip in the capital, Baghdad. This after interfaith talks with the country's prominent Shia leader will be crossing live to Erbil. Sophia Barberini is standing by. Officials in Yemen say at least 90 fighters have been killed amid clashes between pro-government forces and Iran-backed Houthi rebels in the Marib province. Also coming up for you in the programme, hundreds of thousands of residents in France's Pas-de-Calais region are in lockdown this weekend. They join Dunkirk and the Nice resort. A warm welcome. You're tuned into France 24. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Biahi with the headlines for you this hour. Our top story then, Pope Francis has held the first public mass of his historic Iraq trip. Pope Francis then delivering the mass at the Church of St. Joseph in Baghdad to a spare gathering of faithful and officials due to coronavirus restrictions. Well, earlier in the day, the 84-year-old Pope held an interfaith meeting with one of Shia Islam's most prominent figures, the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. The pair then discussing security for Iraq's minority Christian community and promoting unity and peace nationwide. France 24's Catherine Gideir-Glifford reports.
A humble address for a historic meeting. Pope Francis's high-security motorcade pulled up at a back alley in the holy city of Najaf, the home of one of the world's most esteemed Islamic figures. White doves were released in a symbol of peace as the pontiff stood at the Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani's doorway. The Ayatollah rarely appears in public, but his few powerful political interventions have helped shape present-day Iraq. Behind closed doors, the pair discussed the need for religious coexistence. Shortly afterwards, the Ayatollah's office released a statement in defence of the country's Christian minority, hit by considerable violence in recent decades. It read, Grand Ayatollah Sistani affirmed his concern that Christian citizens should live like all Iraqis, in peace and security and with their full constitutional rights. Pope Francis then travelled some 200 kilometres to the ruins of the ancient city of Ur in southern Iraq, a holy site for Muslims, Jews and Christians alike. Surrounded by religious leaders, he called for peaceful coexistence in a country torn apart by sectarianism.
Ostilità, estremismo e violenza non nascono da un animo religioso, sono tradimenti della religione. E noi credenti non possiamo tacere quando il terrorismo abusa della religione.
Next up for the Pope, back to Baghdad, where he's leading a mass at the St. Joseph Cathedral, before visiting churches in Mosul, badly damaged during the fight against the Islamic State group. The tour marks the first ever papal visit to Iraq.
Well, staying in Iraq, Erbil City is preparing to welcome Pope Francis on Sunday. There he's set to deliver a sermon at the François Hariri Stadium in the city. Let's get you more on this. Sophia Barberini is standing by. She's an independent journalist. She's in Erbil. Sophia, talk us through why Erbil City is significant for Pope Francis.
Well, Erbil in 2014 became a safe haven of sorts for hundreds of thousands of Christians who were forced to flee their cities and towns in the adjacent Nineveh province. When the Islamic State came to power and forced these minorities out, not just Christians, but also Yazidis, most of them made their way into the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And into Erbil, particularly or specifically into a neighborhood called Ankawa, which is where I am at the moment. In 2014, Ankawa was filled with displaced Christians. They were welcomed. Many of them have actually stayed. Many of them will be going to the mass that the Pope is set to hold tomorrow in Hariri Stadium. So for the Pope to come here and to visit the men, women, and children who remained displaced years after ISIS rose to power is a very important move. There is also a political symbolism behind it. The Pope comes to Iraq. It's important for him to not just visit federal Iraq, but also to step into the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where a lot of Christians do reside.
So as we're saying, Sophia, that meeting or mass, if you will, in Erbil set for Sunday. In the meantime, there's been a pretty busy schedule for Pope Francis. Today he held talks with one of the Shia Islam's most influential figures. Walk us through, if you will, what came out of those interfaith talks.
Yes, his schedule has been jam-packed. It's a brief journey, but it's very busy. And one of the more exciting, let's say, meetings and definitely unprecedented was his meeting this morning with the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, who is Iraq's top Shiite figure. The Pope reached Najaf city in the south, which is where Ali al-Sistani lives. He was greeted by banners with sayings of Imam Ali, who is a central figure in Shia Islam. One of his main sayings is that people are of two kinds, either your brothers in faith or your equals in humanity. And this kind of played into that theme that the Pope has really been going for of coexistence. The meeting itself lasted a little more than 45 minutes. It was a private meeting. Ali al-Sistani is known for being an incredibly private person. He doesn't really meet with officials. He doesn't give interviews. But what transpired from the meeting, according to the Grand Ayatollah's office, is that the two religious leaders spoke about injustice, oppression, poverty, and religious and intellectual persecution. This was Ali al-Sistani's office. The Pope's spokesperson after the meeting said that the Pope had thanked Ali al-Sistani for raising his voice in defense of the weakest and most persecuted. So really, this was a very important meeting between two top religious figures, and Christians across Iraq hope that it will somehow give more hope, a greater show of support by Sistani towards the Christian community.
All right, Sophia, following that historic three-day visit by the Pope in Iraq for us. Thank you. In other world news, officials in Yemen say at least 90 fighters have been killed amid clashes between pro-government forces and Iran-backed Houthi rebels. Last month, rebels then launching an offensive to take Marib, the last stronghold of pro-government forces in the north. Well, earlier this week, the US called for an end to the offensive, announcing millions of dollars in aid. The details with France 24's Claire Rush.
The renewed offensive has been raging for the past month. Houthi rebels, backed by Iran, looking to seize Marib. The oil-rich region is the government's last stronghold in northern Yemen. The campaign has been fierce. Hundreds of fighters on both sides have been killed. Losing Marib would be a major setback for the government and for its backer, neighboring Saudi Arabia, which has been targeted by increasingly frequent cross-border Houthi attacks in recent weeks. The Saudi-led coalition has been battling the rebels for the past 6 years in what is widely seen as a proxy war between Riyadh and its arch-rival, Iran. But the coalition's future is now uncertain. One of its key supporters, the U.S., has ended its support for offensive operations and paused arms sales to Saudi Arabia, with Joe Biden reversing the policies of his two predecessors. He's also lifted the designation of the Houthis as a terrorist group and named a new special envoy to Yemen, Timothy Lenderking. In a push to end the war, Lenderking reportedly met with Houthis in Oman last month and traveled to Saudi Arabia earlier this week.
Special Envoy Lenderking is now back in Riyadh for further consultations with Saudi Arabia on resolving the conflict and bringing relief to the humanitarian plight of the Yemeni people.
The U.S., along with the UN, looking to renew peace talks. Multiple diplomatic efforts over the years have failed. The conflict has claimed tens of thousands of lives, displaced millions, and pushed many to the brink of famine, in what the UN calls the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
Hundreds of thousands of residents in France's northern Pas-de-Calais region are in lockdown this weekend. Pas-de-Calais then joining Dunkirk and the resort of Nice, which are already shut down on Saturdays and Sundays. In total, over 2 million people across France are required to stay home this weekend, unless, of course, they can provide a written exemption. Here are some of the residents in the Pas-de-Calais region.
Il fait beau, donc il y a plein de gens dehors, pourtant on est supposé être en confinement, donc c'est un peu étonnant. Mais donc moi j'ai fait mon attestation, normalement on a 1 heure donc je ne vais pas forcément traîner.
Je suis moi en colère et moi je suis vaccinée parce que je suis soignante, donc j'ai eu cette chance d'être vaccinée très vite. Et je me dis je suis obligée de porter le masque, quoi. Je suis obligée d'être confinée alors que je suis vaccinée. Donc voilà, mon message c'est vaccinez-vous. Vaccinez-vous, qu'on puisse sortir de tout ça.
Residents in the Pas-de-Calais region, you're up to date. Join us for more international headlines coming up shortly.